Going to a movie, going to church, going to a concert, going to school, and going to the grocery store should never mean never coming home again. It's happened in Aurora, Charleston, Las Vegas, Parkland, and so many other cities, and now in Boulder. Sadly, it's become an all too familiar story in the United States. The flowers, they fade. The memorials, they go away, and the communities are left still dealing with the trauma. What is going to happen now, this time in this place? Joining me now is Colorado State Representative Judy Amable. This community, she serves this community where King Soopers is. It's in her district. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time. I wanted to ask you, me. Of course, I did hear that you know one of the victims. I'm sure so many people in the community know one of them because there are so many of the victims now. But you know Jody Waters. She was killed in the grocery store. What can you tell us about her?
So I know Jody. She owned a store on the Pearl Street Mall in the 90s, in the early 90s. And it had kids' clothing, and then it had women's clothing and all kinds of other things. So all the moms that I knew, we all went there and bought stuff for our kids. And you went there once and she asked you your name, and then she always remembered your name. And she knew your kids, she knew how old they were, she knew what kind of stuff you liked. She just was really a genuine person who knew how to connect with everybody. So there are so many of the women that I'm friends with are grieving for her right now. And later on, she worked at a different store on the Pearl Street Mall. And same thing, I walked in there, I hadn't seen her in a couple of years, and she immediately remembered my name and knew about my kids, and really just was that kind of a person who connected with people on a very genuine level.
It's comforting and so saddening to hear these stories of the lives, the wonderful lives that these people were living, and the fact that their futures were just simply stolen from them. I was really struck because I heard you say, in speaking in the aftermath of this, that you don't want to hold a moment of silence for these victims, not out of not disrespecting them, instead out of respect for them. Can you tell me why?
Yeah, I think we've all been a little too silent, and it's time to get loud. We need the federal government to enact this assault weapons ban. We need a national universal background check, and we need better access to mental health care resources for our communities.
I wanted to ask you specifically about that, because the shooter's brother, and learning more about the shooter, the little that we are learning so far about the suspect is that the brother has said that he was paranoid, that he suffers from mental illness. And we know from sources that he bought that gun only 6 days before the shooting. It's important, I always have to say, and I want to say, that mental illness does not mean that you are violent. Not at all. But the reason that I bring it up is that you have been very open about one of the driving reasons behind your push for one gun-related reform in your state, a red flag law that was passed in the state. Your son has battled for some time multiple diagnoses of mental illness. I would like your thoughts on the role, as people start pointing to mental illness here, the role of that here, and also if you think this red flag law could have stopped this.
So yes, I do have a personal connection with this issue, and I testified on the red flag law, and I do think that if the family had known about that law and understood how they could actually use that law to help them, that it would have been effective. But it's very possible that they didn't know. And also, they maybe had no way to predict that their person who was struggling would turn violent in this way. And as you said, most people with mental illness are not violent. 99.9% of people with mental illness are not violent. So we don't want to punish people and further stigmatize them and shame them at this moment in time. What we want to do is say to people, you have somebody in your family who's struggling. let us make it a lot easier for you to navigate the system by which that person can get the help they need. I know personally, spending 10 years that looking for ways to get help for my family, it's really hard to do. And it's hard to find the resources. It's hard to figure out how you're going to pay for the resources. It's hard to, you can buy a gun in 30 seconds, but if you want an appointment with a psychiatrist, that takes 2 to 3 months before you can get in to see a psychiatrist. We have to change that.
Yeah, that sure puts a fine point on it. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.